think the fascinating thing about Puma Punku is how did these structures get built? We're talking about stone that is 25 feet high, stone that is hundreds of tons.
This is one of the coldest, windiest places on Earth, yet it holds the biggest mystery in South America. Puma Punku. The stonework here makes the Egyptian pyramids look rough. The corners are perfect 90-degree angles. The surfaces are polished like glass. It screams high technology, but we might have been giving the aliens too much credit.
The ruins we find at Puma Punku are simply extraordinary.
A breakthrough using 3D modeling has cracked the code of the H-blocks. The results are shocking, not because they found advanced machines, but because they found something arguably smarter. The H-blocks were hiding a massive secret in plain sight, beyond the naked eye. For over 100 years, Puma Punku has been the poster child for impossible archaeology. You stand there, at an altitude of nearly 13,000 feet in the Bolivian Andes, gasping for air, and you look at these gray stones. They don't look real. They look like concrete. They look like they were stamped out of a machine press yesterday. And that visual perfection has led us down a rabbit hole of wild theories. Everyone's obsessed with the H-blocks. These are distinct H-shaped andesite stones that look like they are meant to interlock. And for a long time, the narrative was simple. They are all identical. The story went that if you took an H-block from the north side of the ruin and swapped it with one from the south side, it would fit perfectly, like a standardized machine part. This idea fueled the ancient aliens crowd for seasons. I mean, how could guys with stone hammers and copper chisels make mass-produced, interchangeable parts? It sounds impossible. But here's the catch. We were trusting our eyes, and our eyes are easily fooled. Enter the era of 3D scanning. Recently, researchers, including independent investigators like the team at Ancient Architects and data scientists, decided to stop guessing and start measuring. But not with tape measures. They used photogrammetry and laser scanning to create digital twins of these stones. We are talking about capturing data points down to the millimeter. And get this. When you overlay the digital models of these identical H-blocks on top of each other, they don't match. They are close, sure. They look the same from 5 feet away. But when you zoom in on the computer, the angles are slightly off. The dimensions vary by just enough to prove a crucial point. These were not made by a machine. They were not cast in a mold. If they were molded using some lost geopolymer paste technology, every single one would be a clone of the master mold. But they aren't. The 3D scans revealed the human error in the process. But don't get me wrong, this isn't about sloppy work. It's about identifying the signature of hand tools. The scans picked up subtle drag marks, tiny divots, and variations in the depth of the intercuts. This changes the entire conversation. We aren't looking at a lost industrial laser cutter. We are looking at the most disciplined, obsessive manual labor force in human history. The scans showed that while the blocks look flat, they actually have microscopic waves consistent with pounding and grinding. It's the difference between a table from IKEA and a table made by a master carpenter. One is perfect because a robot made it. The other is perfect because a human spent 1,000 hours sanding it. Puma Punku is the second one. This discovery destroys the geopolymer theory. For years, people argued that the stone was actually an ancient concrete. They said the builders ground up the rock and poured it into forms. If that were true, the air bubbles and the surface texture would look different under a scan. Instead, the 3D data supports the idea that this is natural andesite, quarried and carved. But this creates a new mystery. If they didn't use molds and they didn't use lasers, how did they make them look so similar that for centuries we thought they were clones? The answer lies in a technique that is actually smarter than just using a machine. It's a concept called standardization by template, and it's arguably the biggest leap in ancient engineering. The scan data suggests the existence of a master template. Think of it like a stencil. The architects of Tiwanaku didn't just tell the workers, "Go make an H shape." They likely created a precise guide, maybe out of wood or metal, and every single stone was checked against that guide. They were checking for flatness, using a level of quality control that rivals modern factories. So, the H-blocks were not what we thought. They aren't evidence of lost high-tech machinery. They are evidence of a lost high-tech organizational system. The miracle isn't the tool, it's the management. But knowing they were hand-carved doesn't explain how they moved them. Because while the H-blocks are famous, they are actually small compared to the monsters next door. We know they weren't molded, but you won't believe how heavy the other stones are. Defying gravity. While the H-blocks get all the fame for their shape, they are actually pretty light in the grand scheme of things. Most of the H-blocks weigh a few tons. Impressive, but movable. But sitting right next to them are the platform stones. And these things are absolute beasts. We are talking about slabs of red sandstone that weigh up to 131 tons. That is roughly 262,000 pounds. To put that in perspective, that's about the same weight as a fully loaded Boeing 757 or a herd of 20 African elephants. And the builders of Puma Punku didn't just have to lift them, they had to move them. The quarries for this red sandstone are located about 6 to 10 miles away. Now, 10 miles might not sound like a lot if you're in a truck, but remember where we are. We are in the Altiplano. It's a high-altitude plateau. The terrain is rough, uneven, and unforgiving, and they didn't have the wheel. Well, technically they knew about circles, but they didn't have heavy load-bearing wheels or carts. So, how do you move a 131-ton rock 10 miles without a flatbed truck? The scanning and topographical analysis of the region gives us some clues. The most likely method involves a massive amount of prepared infrastructure. We aren't just talking about ropes and pulling. We are talking about prepared roadbeds. They likely used a system of rollers, maybe wood, maybe stone spheres, and a track system. But here's the kicker. At this altitude, there are no big trees. The Altiplano is mostly scrub brush and grass. So, where did the timber come from to make the rollers? They would have had to import massive amounts of lumber from lower elevations, dragging the wood up the mountains just to drag the stones across the plateau. The logistics are mind-bending, and it gets crazier. The 3D analysis of the unfinished blocks shows hoisting grips. These are specific indentations carved into the sides of the stones. They look like handles, but they are made of solid rock. These were likely used to tie massive ropes made of llama skin or woven grass. Imagine the scene. You'd need hundreds, maybe thousands of men pulling in unison. A single mistake, a single slip, and a 131-ton slab crushes everyone in its path. It requires a level of social coordination that is almost harder to believe than aliens. It means the Tiwanaku culture had a hierarchy so strict and so powerful that they could command armies of laborers to dedicate their lives to moving a rock. The scans also revealed something else about the platform. It wasn't just a pile of rocks. The stones were held together with metal cramps. This is one of the few places in the Americas where we see this. They carved T-shaped or I-shaped grooves into two connecting stones. Then they poured molten metal, usually a copper arsenic nickel alloy, into the groove. When the metal cooled, it hardened and locked the stones together. This proves they had advanced metallurgy. They had portable smelters. They could bring molten metal to the construction site and pour it in place. The 3D scans of these cramp sockets show they are standardized too. They had a system. But why go to all this trouble? Why move 131-ton slabs and lock them with metal? Because they were building something designed to last forever. They were building an earthquake-proof bunker for their gods. The interlocking shapes, the metal clamps, the massive weight. It's all seismic engineering. This region is prone to earthquakes. If you just stack rocks, they fall over. If you interlock them like a 3D puzzle and clamp them with metal, they move with the ground but don't break. So we have the how of the movement, brute force and brilliant engineering. And we have the how of the cutting, templates and time. But the scans revealed something else that is kind of tragic. When you look at the entire site plan generated by the 3D data, you realize something heartbreaking. Puma Punku isn't a ruin. It's a construction site. The layout reveals a secret that explains why it looks so strange today. The sudden stop. One of the most jarring things about Puma Punku is that the blocks are scattered everywhere. It looks like a giant kid came along and kicked over his toy castle. For a long time, archaeologists thought this was just the result of thousands of years of looting and earthquakes. And sure, that's part of it. But the 3D mapping of the site tells a different story. When you analyze the position of the blocks and the drag marks on the ground, it starts to look like the work stopped in the middle of a shift. Puma Punku was never finished. The 3D models show blocks that are in various stages of completion. This is the smoking gun against the ancient laser theory. If they had a machine that just zapped cut the stones, every stone would be finished instantly. But we find stones that are rough out. They have the general shape of an H block, but the faces are still bumpy. They haven't been sanded down yet. This confirms the manual labor theory. We can see the progression. Phase 1, quarry the rough shape. Phase 2, drag it to the site. Phase 3, carve the precise details using stone pounders, made of harder hematite or basalt. Phase 4, grind and polish with sand and water. The scans show us stones stuck in Phase 2 and Phase 3. It's like a snapshot in time. You can almost see the workers putting down their tools. But why did they stop? The leading theory, supported by climate data, is a massive environmental collapse. Around 1000 AD, the area was hit by a mega drought. The Tiwanaku civilization relied on a sophisticated system of raised field agriculture called suka colis. They dug canals around raised mounds of dirt. The canals kept the crops from freezing at night and provided water. But when the rain stopped for decades, the system failed. No food means no labor force. You can't have 5,000 guys dragging a 131-ton rock if they are starving to death. The construction of Puma Punku likely ground to a halt as the civilization collapsed into chaos. The scattered look of the blocks might also be evidence of this chaos. It wasn't just an earthquake. It might have been a revolution. When the people realized the gods weren't bringing the rain, they might have turned on the elite. Those intricate, perfect stones represented the power of the ruling class. Toppling them would have been a powerful statement. The 3D reconstruction allows us to put the pieces back together, virtually. And when we do, we see what they were trying to build. It wasn't just a random collection of H blocks. It was a massive, intricate gateway system. The H blocks were likely connectors for a wall or a facade, possibly covered in gold plates or textiles. The perfect drill holes we see, the ones that look like a power drill made them, were likely anchor points for these decorations. The scans show that even these holes aren't perfectly cylindrical deep down. They wobble slightly. Again, the signature of a hand tool, probably a copper tube used with sand as an abrasive, spun between the hands like a fire starter. So, the tragedy of Puma Punku is that it's a masterpiece that never got its grand opening. It's a ghost town of ambition. But even unfinished, it teaches us something incredible about the human mind. We didn't need aliens to reach for the stars. We just needed geometry and grit. The precision is mind-blowing, but the real magic is in the math. The metric system? Let's go back to that standardization idea, because it is the real key to the Puma Punku mystery. In the modern world, we take standardization for granted. If you buy a nut and bolt from a hardware store in New York, it fits a nut and bolt bought in London. That is the basis of the Industrial Revolution. In the ancient world, everything was bespoke. If you built a wall, you cut one rock to fit the specific rock next to it. They were unique pairs. Puma Punku broke that rule. The 3D scans highlight that the H blocks were an attempt at interchangeability. They wanted any H block to fit with any other H block. This is an industrial mindset in a pre-industrial world. The math required to do this is intense. They had to maintain right angles, 90 degrees, on inside corners. Do you know how hard it is to cut a sharp inside corner into hard rock with a round stone ball? It's nearly impossible. The scans show that the corners aren't actually perfectly sharp. They are slightly rounded at the very microscopic apex, or they have a tiny overcut where the tool went a bit too deep to clear the corner. This is exactly what you would expect from a chisel and hammer operation. The Gateway of the Sun and the other massive portals show this same command of geometry. The reliefs carved into them are perfectly symmetrical. The 3D data allows us to measure the proportions. They were using a specific unit of measurement. We don't know what they called it, but they were consistent. Some researchers suggest they used a Tiwanaku cubit. By analyzing the recurring distances in the scans, we can reverse engineer their ruler. This proves they had a centralized planning committee. You don't get this kind of consistency if every mason is just doing their own thing. The H blocks themselves act like hinges. The 3D models show that the legs of the H are slightly tapered in some cases, which would allow them to slot into a matching socket, creating a dovetail joint. This is a woodworking technique applied to stone. Think about that. They were treating 10-ton blocks of andesite as if they were pieces of pine wood. They were using joinery, mortise and tenon, cramps, dovetails, on a scale that is frankly terrifying. But what's fascinating here isn't that they used lasers. It's that they had the audacity to try this with stone tools. It's like trying to carve a statue out of diamond using a plastic spoon. It takes patience that modern humans just don't have. And this brings us to the final point. Why do we keep looking for aliens? Why is it so hard to believe that humans did this? The answer tells us more about ourselves than the ancients. Smarter than we think. We love a good mystery. It's in our DNA. We stare at the impossible geometry of the past, and our brains itch for an explanation that fits our modern worldview. When you look at the gray andesite ruins of Puma Punku, sitting there at 12,800 feet in the Bolivian highlands, logical explanations tend to die of oxygen deprivation. It is fun to think that a spaceship landed in Bolivia and taught people how to cut rocks with lasers. It sells books. It launches TV franchises. It keeps us up at night scrolling through forums. But before we get to the truth that the 3D scans revealed, we have to respect why the wild theories exist in the first place. Because when you look at these stones with the naked eye, the alien explanation actually feels easier. Consider the H blocks. These aren't just rocks. They look like prefabricated concrete. They look like industrial components for a machine we've forgotten how to turn on. One of the most persistent and fascinating theories isn't just that aliens built it, but that Puma Punku wasn't a temple at all. The theory suggests it was a factory or a power plant. Look at the precision of the grooves. They are cut to a depth of mere millimeters, perfectly uniform. Some engineers have looked at the H blocks and argued they act like a massive ancient motherboard. If you arrange them in a specific line, could they have conducted energy? Was this a piezoelectric generator utilizing the quartz content of the stone to tap into the Earth's electromagnetic field? It sounds insane, but when you run your finger along a corner that is sharper than a modern razor blade, insane starts to feel like a valid scientific hypothesis. And then there's the liquid stone theory. This one is terrifyingly brilliant. It suggests that the builders of Puma Punku possessed a chemical technology we have lost, a way to soften rock. They didn't chip away at the andesite, they melted it. They cast these stones into molds using ancient geopolymers, the same way we pour concrete today. It would explain the lack of chisel marks on the surface. It would explain how they achieved such complex inner angles that even modern CNC machines struggle to replicate. If this is true, it implies a civilization that didn't just understand architecture, but mastered molecular chemistry thousands of years before the periodic table was invented. But it gets wilder. You can't talk about Puma Punku without talking about acoustics. There are legends in the Andes of sound being used to manipulate matter. The trumpets of Jericho concept. Did they use sound levitation? Did they tune instruments to a specific frequency that rendered the heavy stones weightless, floating them into place like balloons? Some researchers argue that the entire complex is an acoustic trap, designed to resonate at a frequency that alters human consciousness. You walk in, the wind hits the stones, the vibration starts, and suddenly, you aren't in Bolivia anymore. You're in a different dimension. It's a compelling thought that the technology wasn't mechanical, but vibrational, a technology of sound that we are too deaf to hear. And finally, the darker theory, the cataclysm. Puma Punku looks like a bomb went off. The stones are scattered like toys thrown by a tantruming giant. They are shattered. Standard archaeology says this is the result of time and looting. But the fringe theory suggests something violent and instantaneous. A global flood, a pole shift, a solar flare that struck the Earth 12,000 years ago, wiping out a high-tech civilization in a single afternoon. Under this theory, Puma Punku isn't a ruin of a primitive tribe. It's the wreckage of a chapter 1 of humanity that got erased from the history books. These theories are intoxicating. They make the world feel magical and vast. But recently, we did something that changed the conversation. We stopped guessing and started scanning. The 3D scans of Puma Punku have done something very important. They have given the credit back to the people who actually did the work. When we say it must have been aliens, or it must have been magic lasers, we are basically insulting our ancestors. We are saying, you guys were too primitive to figure this out. You were just hunter-gatherers. You couldn't have understood geometry. So the lasers and aliens might be out, but the reality of Puma Punku was actually cooler. It was human genius, pure and simple. What do you think? Does finding out it was handmade ruin the magic or make it more impressive? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and hit subscribe for more ancient truths. Thanks for watching.